Hey everybody, this is the second Heaven's Vault playthrough. It's going to be pretty freeform. I'm just going to go through it and talk a lot. We're not going to be talking so much about the game this time, but rather the meta. Things like the engine, possible options for creating different games that are a little bit more solid in terms of connecting up the themes and the pacing, stuff like that. If you have any comments on the game or about that sort of stuff, feel free to just let loose below. We're not sticking to the format where you have to only comment on things that only happened so far because we've already beat the game, so we can talk about it straight through to the end. So the only difference, as far as I know, between New Game and New Game Plus is that we just know more words. That's not a big deal for us since we already knew a lot of words. There were a couple of things we couldn't translate, but they were pretty basic. Like, you could guess them from context. So what we're going to be doing...
Stories don't have tidy beginnings. The past is always present. But there has to be a spark. Something that brings the past to light.
So we're going to go ahead and talk about a lot of the kind of constraints and thematic progressions to this game. Notice that this begins where the game ends. This is, in fact, Heaven's Vault. There's nothing misleading about it. This is literally how we discover it at the end of the game, except for, I think most people probably have the Empress with them instead of 6. It serves as a good introduction. We covered that back in the very first episode of the Deep Dive into Heaven's Vault, but I wanted to make it clear that this is where themes would start to happen. This is where you would lay the seeds for the core themes of the game. Instead, the writing is pretty light. The voiceover, there must be a trigger which brings the past to light. That's a good, enticing voiceover, but the writing isn't oriented to bring us a theme. There's very little in the way of bringing the past to light in this game that actually matters. It doesn't really tie into our character at all, even though we are an orphan who doesn't know who their parents were and had a very strange adoption on Iox. Bringing our past to light is never an ongoing theme. The themes of this game are more about things like leaving the world behind or whether the past repeats. And I think I would have preferred if we had brought those themes up starting from right now, rather than letting them languish. There are a lot of things that would be better in this game. A lot of the things would sell better if there was a contiguous theme, if there was something that tied the world to us and us to the world. Structurally, there is. This world is very coherent and cohesive when it comes to the themes that it has, but the problem is the story doesn't bring them up. For example, the way that Aaliyah doesn't have any past and sails the world and never sees anybody out on the rivers, and even things like the way that gravity can be manipulated by iolite stones, all of those could easily tie into her fundamental nature as a person, and they could play up her story. It resonates, her and the universe. They have the same story. It doesn't actually happen, though. It's all there, but it never gets harnessed. And that makes sense. They're basically using a game engine or a story engine that was developed for short stories.
My story begins on Iox. That was where I met the robot.
So that's the sort of thing we're going to be dealing with this time. We're going to be looking at the kinds of themes, why I think they fall short, and the sorts of things that I might have done instead or changed. Now that we know that these are issues, we could probably develop a game that's much tighter. I don't know whether or not the devs... I mean, I highly doubt that the devs are watching this at this point. I think they watched the first episode and they're fine with that. But I don't believe that the devs understood how much this game was different from 80 Days. I don't think they understood how poorly this mechanism serves for this kind of longer story. And I I think that because we've gotten a few, sorry, close the window here. We've gotten a few messages from them that say that there's no way to lose the game and stuff like that. So it's clear they don't really understand the constraints in the game that they've created. At least they didn't back when they launched it. And that's some of the things I'm going to be discussing. When we do this playthrough, I don't know if we're going to do the whole thing or not. We may skimp it a little bit. But last time we did a kind of screw Iox playthrough. This time we're going
15, to... when my Ari rescued me from the slums of Elbereth and brought me here.
This time we're going to try and do more of a friendly thing where we get more lore into the loop and into our past, maybe.
I still don't know why she did it.
I'm probably going to try and read the conversations aloud. I'm not going to voice act them, but I'm going to read them aloud because they're so hard to watch because they're completely silent. You're our expert on history. Tell me what you make of this. And I say, it's a brooch. Yes, Aaliyah, but I didn't summon you halfway across the nebula to tell me that. It's certainly old. Here is where we're getting introduced into the fundamental mechanisms of the game. Collecting artifacts and reading inscriptions. They are the mechanisms of the gameplay, but they don't tie into the story as tightly as I would have liked. We can talk more about that some other time. Well, we got that weird vibration thing happening where something random in my room vibrates whenever the computer decides it's going to do stuff. So you can see that we kept all of our translation knowledge here. So we can translate this early stuff without any challenge at all. Just got to find all the pieces we need. There you go. And what is that? Live, love. The Holy Emperor commands your love. That's correct, isn't it? This is interesting. Why is it... I'm pretty sure that is commands, isn't it? Oh, I was just a little bit broken. Okay, that's fine. The UI sometimes gets a little busted. Professor, this friend of yours, if he's in love with you, I'm not sure how I can help. My friend, Aaliyah, has disappeared. He told me he was going to a moon called Maerzi. I can't go hunting the nebula for missing people, Aaliyah, but you can. That's what you do, isn't it? Find things? You're worried about him. He's important to me, because he also believes in the loop. I don't know what he was doing out there. I'll see what I can dig up. I'm going to be nice to Iox this time through. We're going to try and dig into this theory they've got. They mentioned things like... they mentioned things like they were going to build a big ship and stuff like that. We'll see if we can learn anything about that sort of detail on this trip. You're taking that robot with you. Thank you, Professor. I long to see the nebula. Oh, and before you go, you should look in on Huang. He was eager to see you. I think in this version I know more about the books than he does. We'll see. I know he's rather beneath you, but you could at least say good faith to him. He's not beneath me. That's the reason, by the way, that's the reason on the first playthrough I didn't like this lady. She's like, he's beneath you? Why? Because he's a librarian? Because he's nervous? Why is he beneath me? Why don't you tell me why I should dislike someone who is 99% similar to everybody that plays this game? It is wonderful to be accompanying you. Oh yeah? And why is that? I find humans fascinating, and you are very different to most here. I've only recently been activated. I'm calling you 6. 6? I shall remember that. So, In the first time we played through, I talked a lot about this idle conversation system where you can hit Q and R to progress idle conversations. And I talked about how you get a lot of that stuff on the side, 6 awakes on IOX, all that stuff. That stuff tapers off dramatically after this first session, which is a shame. Idle conversations are a big part of what I like about this kind of game, and the fact that they stop serving, they stop being of any use, means that you stop having idle conversations, and you only focus on the conversations where you're guaranteed to get a nugget of information. We shall see whether or not a playthrough that focuses more on people preserves those, but I don't think it will. I think it's a matter of front-loading details. Are you still wasting your time on your curious notions of history? Miari wants me to find Renba. You haven't lured him into archaeology as well, have you? He was always so devout. What do you mean? Well now. Your ideas are hardly wholesome. All that death and decay. You should devote yourself to a real science. Metallics, maybe. Loop philosophy. That's why we're here today. We're here to learn more about the loop. Most people think you will not be content until you have unearthed your own skull. Good faith to you, Elia. Even if I do unearth my own skull, that would definitely solve the problem. I really hate her. Understandable. So we're going to have to just take a look at some of the details that we might have forgotten since they taper off. Things like getting details from idle conversations. I think that has a lot of potential, but it does require you to have quite a few idle details. It requires you to have a lot of things that can be constructed out of idle details. And the problem with that is that you need to have a system that supports that, and this is not a system that does. It's not generative enough. The idle details in this game are serve only a couple of core points. You build a couple of basic things out of them, like the locations of a new moon. And that's something that you can't just do more idle conversations to track down more new moons. You run out of moons at some point in this game. But there are a lot of other possibilities that we could explore with other kinds of games, where the idle conversations can unlock programmable things, unlock unscripted things. And I think that would be an interesting version of this, because the idea of gallivanting around having idle conversations sure is something that doesn't exist right now and would be very nice, rather than just having pre-scripted barks all the time. Here's the Annals of Mazwai. We didn't get to read that last time. We found a couple copies, but we never got a chance to actually read it. I don't think it exists in the game as a whole text. What is that? Something is vibrating. I wonder if that was it. We'll see. All right, so here we've got some words that we actually don't know, which is a little bit unusual. So this word here, it would be First Empress. Buried. Is this buried the robots? Or is it banished the robots? I think it's probably banished, but I can't remember. I guess it doesn't matter. And then over here, and lived inside them. Because see how it's many U's, them? We happen to know that she did live inside them. We recruited her in the last playthrough. That was obnoxious. Sorry. Maybe you've read it wrong. I'd best not keep you. I hope you find him. Shall we proceed to your ship now? One of the things that we didn't get to talk about in the first playthrough is why Renba is embedded inside of 6. We never learned that. Oh, I think I know what it is. It's that. The thing making noise. You think Miari's friend is in trouble? As I say, mistress, we should know shortly if we depart. Then let's get to it. Hopefully we'll be in time to help. Whatever has happened to Janiqui. So, the core concept of this game's fundamental dialogue engine, in case you missed it, there are preconditions to every piece of dialogue. So the result is that no matter what you do, you can, how do I say this? Because there are preconditions to the dialogue, you just write it in fragments. Everything is a fragment. And then whenever you go someplace or learn something, it just looks through all of the pieces of dialogue and sees...
wanted us to sail to Mayerzi. It was a short sail through fast waters.
And the idea is that it just goes through and it tries to check and see whether or not you've found the things that you're trying to find. If a piece of dialogue is going to be a... Sorry, I turned it wrong on purpose just to see where it goes, but the visual is a little distracting. So what I'm trying to say is it looks through and finds random pieces of dialogue, but unfortunately that doesn't lead to very good chains of dialogue. Even if you can technically write it as a chain, you can't really see it as a chain when you're thinking about it. The tool doesn't exist. But what I learned by, thinking about this sort of thing is that what we've got is a situation where it's not just the constraints that matter, it's also what feeds into them. We can talk about how the constraints of this game, of each piece of dialogue, allow you to explore as you see fit. But the truth is that the game has to understand those constraints and serve them up to you whenever you need to be somewhere or learn something. So when we think about it that way, there are certain chains that form automatically. This happens first, this happens second, this happens third. But there are also just things that need to be synced up. And an easy way to do that is to understand how to provide the right seeds for the constraints you're trying to do. So just as an example, if we have to do something that is, you have to be on Iox for a certain plot point. The game has to understand that you have to go to Iox for the plot point and has to have a way to entice you to get to Iox. And here's the thing, certain kinds of dialogue can be flagged as, being Iox bound. Once you've done that, what you can do is you can search for things that have the right seeds as well as things that have the right constraint. So if you need the player to go to Iox, all you really have to do is tell the player these things that make them want to go to Iox. You have to get them excited to go to Iox. And that can be pointless stuff. You can just have random tidbits where she talks about how cool Iox is or whatever. It can be semi-hardball. It can play stuff like softball, I guess you'd call it. I guess you play stuff like Iox. We heard that there was going to be a funeral for Renba. You can go back to Iox. We see that a couple of times here. But we can do it more algorithmically. We don't have to do it in the way that it's done here, where everything is pre-programmed. We can use whatever pieces of story we need in order to create the result that we're aiming for. And that's something that I don't believe that this system has understood, that this game has understood. And I think it would be it would be very rewarding to have a version of this engine which does understand how to do that and can create that sort of thing. And that's sort of what I'm working on. If you watch my other videos, I do streams on a game I'm working on which has a context engine. It's not a very significant one. I'm going to try and make a context engine in JavaScript that has a different design that allows it to tell more RPG-like stories rather than the kinds of really formulaic stories that I use in the game I'm actually making. But in order to do that, I have to work out all the details, which is kind of why I played the game in the first place. Anyway, it's now been 20 minutes of me prattling on. You notice that I've been taking the wrong turn continuously here. The problem is that this early in the game, if you take a look, the rivers you need don't exist. I can't go in here very easily, but you know what? I'm going to try. This one I can actually reach. You can see that if I follow the next few turnings correctly, I might be able to actually get in there. Let's just, before we sign off, let's just see whether or not I can...
They say on Iox that the rivers flow with the souls of the dead. Anything to scare you to the ground.
So, the reason that people from Iox say that is simply because that is what all of their lore says. The rivers are the blood of the fallen and stuff like that. So it's... maybe we'll learn more about that this playthrough. What are these Chronicles of Mazwai? I believe Mazwai is a pilgrim sailor, or was. Like me. She writes about the various places of the nebula, like me. So from here, we're just going to take a bunch of tight lefts, and about how the Great Loop has acted in those places. Not like me, then. What? How did I miss the turnoff? All right, well, I'm going to go around again off screen. I'll let you see it. See you at the next interesting point.